Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. My special guests are the Duran today, Alexander Mercouris and Christoforou. Good to see both of you. Thanks for taking your evenings out from where you all are to join the program.
Oh, great pleasure. My great pleasure. Both of us.
Great. So before we get started, everyone, welcome to all the moderators. Welcome to the Rockfin community, of course. And also welcome to everyone who might watch this on the replay. Hit that like button to boost both the stream and the video as well. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support this channel, you can do so by supporting independent media. And the links in the video description from Patreon, Substack, YouTube membership, and much more. But let's get started, guys, because I wanted to open up just with your reactions to this hypersonic missile drama that occurred in Kiev. There are reports that the Patriot missile system was downed by the Kinzhal missiles. Of course, Ukraine, when the story first broke in the Western mainstream media, Ukraine said that they had shot down all of the missiles and that they had successfully defended the Patriot system. Then it started coming out little by little that actually at least one of the systems is now destroyed. And now there are military reports from military analysts saying that all the missiles were used Patriot missiles were used during the missile attack. It's about 32 millions upon tens of millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayers' dollars lost. Can you, whoever wants to begin, what is the significance of this news? Russia is saying one thing, Ukraine, of course, is saying a whole other thing. This seems to be very characteristic of the conflict in general. But what's the significance of this Patriot system being attacked the way it was by Russia, given all that's been going on in the conflict? Whoever wants to begin.
Yeah, I think I'm going to begin. I think there's two things to say. First of all, it's now absolutely clear, or so it seems to me, that Ukraine's air defense system is on its last legs. The Patriot was sent to Ukraine to try to plug the holes because its Soviet-era air defense missiles are running out. And we could see that right across Ukraine. The Russians are hitting targets in all sorts of places, which once upon a time would have been defended. They're not being defended anymore. So they're able to hit ammunition dumps, all kinds of things of that sort, logistical places, barracks, all those things, and doing very, very great damage. And the Patriot was sent. It was going to be the game changer missile system. A lot of people were skeptical that it would be, by the way. I mean, it's fair to say that many people said, this isn't quite the, successful system that people expected. But it was sent to Kiev. It was going to protect Kiev. It was going to enable Ukraine to send some more of its old systems to defend other places and positions across Ukraine. It's now been established, I think, conclusively. I'm going to come to that in a moment. But I think it's been established that it can't actually repel Russian missile attacks. That's one thing. That's important. Now, the other thing that's important about this is that when you unpick the story carefully, it's become increasingly clear that Ukraine lies. And it doesn't just lie, it lies to the United States. Because firstly, they gave us this absurd story that they'd shot down every single missile that's ever been fired at Kiev. They do this all the time. I think this has been a long-standing problem. There was a Swedish army officer, former air defense person. He does an enormously wonderful Twitter thread. His name is Mikael Valterson. He said, one day Ukraine claimed that they'd shot down 29 out of 30 missiles, except that 20 cities across Ukraine said that their power had been cut off. So obviously this missile had hopped around, managed to take out all those 20 targets right across Ukraine. It was the most effective missile in the world. So, we've known for a long time that Ukraine doesn't tell the truth, the full truth about missile strikes. But this time, it clearly wanted to conceal from the United States the extent of the damage to the Patriot missile system. So firstly, all the missiles had been shot down. Patriot is fine. Then we got a film, which the Ukrainians weren't happy about, Ukrainian bloggers caught it. They showed the 32 missiles all being launched at once. We saw the big flashes. The US wanted to find out what had happened. They were given assurances that, overall things are well. Only one launcher damaged. Only one launcher destroyed, another launcher damaged. But generally speaking, everything is well, all is good. And then over the course of the next few hours, we got further reports. System is back in operation. We're able to operate it. All is well. And then there's been more reports since then, which appear to be corroborating the Russian account that, in fact, the Russians destroyed 5 launchers, not just one, and they destroyed the radar too. So it shows us, firstly, that the Patriot is not a wonder weapon. I don't think anybody who really understands these things thought it was. But the second is that Ukraine deceives its own major patrons.
Alex.
I'll just say that the big story for me is the video that came out. I think if that video did not come out, then the lie would have been successfully covered up. It would have been Russia says this, we say that, and the collective West media would have supported Ukraine's narrative. And a lot of commenters in the video that me and Alexander made with this story, a lot of people asked the question, rightly so, very interesting comments that they would put on our video. They said, if Ukraine was so successful at shooting down these missiles and they were 6 for 6 on the Kinjal missiles, then why would they be so upset with the video? Why would they send out notices to citizens in Kiev to not shoot video of missile strikes or air defense systems trying to take down missiles? And they did put out notices telling people, warning people, don't take video, don't post videos on social media. Why would they arrest bloggers who took this video? I mean, one would think that if they were 6 for 6 on hypersonic missiles, they would want that social media post to go everywhere, as would the maker and manufacturer of the Patriot missile. They would probably take that video and use it as their marketing promo. Look at what we did. We took out 6 Kinzhal missiles. Here's the social media post. The Patriot system is awesome. But we see that they're very upset with that video because it exposed the truth.
Yeah, and it seems to point to desperation, really. I mean, how does this affect this counteroffensive, by the way? Because we've been hearing about the wonder weapons and the West pouring in and fortifying Ukraine's military, building new militaries for Ukraine. But this counteroffensive keeps on being postponed. I have no idea what date it's actually supposed to happen. A couple of days, maybe 3 months from now. But it seems like this attempt to kind of cover up even just parts of the truth. If Russia's not telling the whole truth, Ukraine seems to be trying to cover up whatever part of the Russian narrative is truthful. So that doesn't really inspire confidence. I'm wondering what your take is on that. Maybe we can go back to you, Alexander.
Well, firstly, we know what the original start date was intended to be because it was in the Pentagon leaks. It was the 30th of April. And we're now, on the 19th of May, and it hasn't happened. It's been postponed. And we've just had further statements from Ukrainian officials saying that they've postponed it again because they don't have enough tanks, they don't have enough machines, they're not ready. And I have to say, I'm sure they're right. But I suspect there are people in the West, in governments, who are probably saying to themselves, this is a reason, it's a real legitimate reason, but it's also beginning to sound like an excuse. And you don't get the sense that the Ukrainians are really keen on launching this offensive at all, because they're always demanding more weapons. They're never going to have enough weapons or enough guns or enough missiles or enough aircraft, fighter jets to conduct this offensive. And they will always say that because basically, deep down, they don't want to launch this offensive because they know that if this offensive is launched, it's not going to achieve any big decisive outcome. Thousands of men will die. Lots of machines will be lost. Ukraine will be left in a very much weaker position. So you don't really want an offensive in that kind of situation. But they've told everybody that they're going to launch it. They've managed to get the Europeans to give them all the tanks. They managed to get the Americans to give them the Bradley vehicles. They managed to get the Americans to send them the Patriot system. So they can't just turn around and say, well, we're calling the whole thing off. So we get this weird dance over this. And I think eventually they will try and launch it. But in the meantime, the Russians are hitting them everywhere that they can, as to taking out ammunition dumps, taking out storage facilities. And one gets the sense that as the Western weapons come in, a lot of them, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them are getting destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, why would you want to launch this counteroffensive or this offensive, whatever you want to call it by now? Why would you want to launch this knowing that it's not going to be successful? And the minute you launch this offensive and it turns out to not be successful, your money dries up. That's it. So they're going to try to delay this as much as possible. I think they're going to start to get a lot of contracts in with the military industrial complex. So they're going to try to extend this, say 4, 5, 6 months. They're going to try to get as many contracts in with the MIC as possible. It doesn't matter if after 1 year the contracts are not going to be fulfilled to Ukraine. The money's going to already be budgeted. Whatever the MIC produces, they could shift it to another conflict zone or to some other country. That's not a big problem. But, they're going to try to extend this out as much as they can so that they can keep the money flowing. I mean, there's so much money being made by so many people in this. Why risk it with a counteroffensive right now? Offensive, counteroffensive. Like I said, I don't even know what to call this thing anymore. They will launch something, but
yes.
My guess is that when they launch it, it's going to be the beginning of the end of the grift.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this counteroffensive has gone through quite a journey, at least the narrative. It was like, we need more. You've top Ukrainian officials saying, we need more, we need more. It's not going to be successful unless we get more. The U.S. and the West have been steadily, but yet, as you said, Alexander, not enough, but they've been steadily sending more and sending more. There's all this talk about F-16s now. The U.S. doesn't want to give them, but they'll let Europe give them. I mean, if you don't have weapons, though, how do you fight? How do you launch a counteroffensive? And then, I guess this gets to like, where are we at actually in this conflict? Because it seems like the confidence that I see in the Western mainstream media seems to waver in the way that the United States, you even have the Financial Times saying, oh, well, we've talked to anonymous US and European officials, and they're saying this is it. Like, your counteroffensive is the last, whatever you have. And if it goes to the G20 summit or the UN General Assembly, in the fall, those are possible areas where negotiations might take place because there might be a lot of pressure if this offensive fails. So I guess, what is your reaction to the confidence, the lack of confidence thereof of this, and how this tells us where we're at in the conflict?
My own personal view is that we are now starting to come to the end of this affair. Now, when I say that, I want to make it clear that, the end can be very prolonged. It might even last years. In a kind of a way, if you think about Vietnam, for example, the United States sent its troops into Vietnam in 1965. By 1968, it was looking for a way out. But the war actually only ended in 1975. It took a very, very long time for this whole process to run its course. So when I say the end of the affair, the end game can be the longest, most grueling part of it. But I think that people in Washington are now looking for a way out. And there's been an absolutely, I think, seminally interesting article in Politico, because they're now talking about freezing the conflict, creating some kind of armistice situation, looking for the Korean type outcome.
Yes.
And if you look at that article very carefully, buried deep inside, there's an absolutely extraordinary sentence in which they say that this would be a politically palatable outcome for the United States. So it's no longer about achieving a victory, because that's out of reach. It's about avoiding a defeat and getting a politically palatable outcome instead. So why would you want a counteroffensive in that kind of situation if that puts you in a weaker position and causes the prospect of that armistice, this freezing of the conflict, to recede? So that's another problem that they have. And if you read that Politico article very carefully, they're making it very clear there that they don't expect this offensive to have any particular decisive outcome. But that's where we are. The hope, I think, right up until the autumn, was that they would be able to achieve some big breakthrough. They had those two offensives in the autumn. They thought then that they could launch an offensive quickly, a third offensive. That didn't happen. Ukraine's losses were bigger than they expected. The Russians parried those two offensives more successfully than was expected. So they had to put off the third offensive, and they're putting it off again and again and again. And now they've decided, well, really, it's gone as far as it can go. We can obviously supply a few more F-16s. We've got to get all those nice contracts out there. I think Alex is absolutely right about that, by the way. But we've also got to save, protect, preserve our political reputations. So what we're looking for now is the politically palatable outcome, something we can spin as a success. And all we need now is to get the Russians to agree.
Yeah. Everything, I think we said this on a show we did recently, Alexander, like 2-3 days ago, that everything from this point on, or at least maybe in the next month, maybe the Biden White House has like a month cushion. But after that, everything's going to be in terms of the election in the United States. And every decision that the White House makes is going to be seen through the lens of Biden's reelection, if Biden really is going through with his campaign. But that's the reality of it. So every decision they're going to make, they're going to sit there and they're going to say, well, does this help us get reelected, or does this not help us get reelected? And we were doing our video the other day, me and Alexander, and I asked Alexander the question. I said, how much time does Biden have with this project Ukraine? And if I was advising Biden, I would say, look, you have maybe a month where you can just pull out of this and let Ukraine collapse. And by the time the election gets started, the American voter is going to forget about it, and that'll be okay. Or after a month's time or 2 months' time, that's it. You're on the hook. You won't be able to just ditch Ukraine. You're going to have to work out some sort of solution, because as you're campaigning, your opponents are going to be using Ukraine against you. And actually, I think we do see Robert Kennedy Jr., he is using Ukraine, that talking point, a lot. And he's really hitting Biden with it. And I think it is working. And I think it's working because people around the world are sick of Zelensky. There's no simpler way to put it. They just don't like the guy. They don't like the money that's going to this thing. They don't like his character. People are tired of this.
Yeah, public opinion in the United States itself is very low on the Ukraine scenario, situation, quagmire, debacle, whatever we want to call it. People are not happy about it. And, RFK Jr., for all intents and purposes, and any other election cycle, would probably be a fringe candidate, as they call them here in the United States, despite the name. But he is not. He is polling quite well. The DNC probably won't let him compete, just like they don't like to let anyone who challenges their establishment types compete. But I think the Ukraine situation is a huge reason why that is. But, speaking of this like frozen conflict, I wanted to talk about Bakhmut. I can't even pronounce the Russian pronunciation of the city. But I wanted to ask you all about, because there is this kind of dual dynamic happening. You have Zelensky traveling all over the world. And before this, there was all kinds of musical chairs happening in the government. And then Ukraine participated in terrorist attack after terrorist attack on journalists. And then, of course, the drone strike on the Kremlin. And he was in Europe. Now he's in Saudi Arabia. Soon he'll be in Hiroshima. A stunning lecture to the Arab countries on the conflict itself and their lack of understanding of it. It seemed like he was trying to insinuate. But I wanted to ask you all about Bakhmut, like, and this world tour. Like, how are these things related? Because it seems like I heard today in Reuters several hours ago that Ukraine is making gains in Bakhmut. And then I'm hearing in other places, not only from Russian sources, but also from just earlier reports of the mainstream media, that it's days to weeks from being complete Russian control. I mean, what's the reality here? And maybe we can also talk about the Zelensky world tour afterward, but maybe we can tackle Bakhmut first, whoever, Alexander.
Well, very briefly, and this is the military thing. I mean, there's Bakhmut, the town, which is almost now completely captured by the Russians. And over the last couple of hours, literally today, there's been more reports of more Russian advances in the... I mean, we're talking about a couple of buildings now that are left on the very western edge of Bakhmut. I mean, if you look at... You actually see pictures. You can get all of these buildings now in one sort of photo. I mean, it's a very small area still to be captured. And it's going to be captured, and it's going to be captured, some people say, by Sunday. I mean, I'm not going to try and provide exact dates, but we are very close to the end of the fighting there. What you also have is an attempted Ukrainian counterattack along the flanks on each side of Bakhmut. Now, what my impression is that this attack, this offensive, hasn't achieved anything so far of any significance, except that it's lost Ukraine a lot of men and a lot of machines. They've captured some fields, some open fields in some places. They've threatened some villages. They're very far from surrounding Bakhmut, as some people are talking about. But there's been suggestions from people in Russia that this is all basically intended more to say to people once Bakhmut falls, oh, but it hasn't really fallen. The fighting is still going on. We're still attacking in various places. The battle is far from over. So there's that side. It's also possibly also intended to keep the Americans and the Western powers at peace by saying, well, look, we haven't actually launched our great offensive, but we are advancing. We are advancing on the flanks. We're capturing the odd village here, the odd field there, even as the main town, the place we were supposed to be defending, falls under Russian control. So I think this is really what the whole story is. But Bakhmut itself, I think the story there is almost done. I mean, one can fantasize or imagine some dramatic change, but I can't really see that dramatic change is going to happen. And all of the reports, the accumulated reports that I now see, is that in order to carry out these counterattacks, these little counterattacks on each side of the city, the effect has been hundreds, perhaps thousands of Ukrainian soldiers killed and wounded. And there have been some rather distressing pictures of Ukrainian cemeteries filling up again with more dead bodies.
Yeah, I think Bakhmut has worked out really well for the Russian military. I mean, they managed to suck in all of the elite Ukraine forces and then some, and basically you had Wagner PMCs, not 100%, but a large portion of the fighting was by Wagner, and it allowed the entire Russian military to dig in and rest up and fortify their positions. And here you have a PMC outfit, which has essentially defeated NATO's strongest military. Not my words, Kissinger's words. Kissinger's words. NATO's, Europe's strongest military. That's what he said yesterday or a couple of days ago in The Economist. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. Wagner has defeated the strongest European military in NATO, and the Russians now have what 500,000 soldiers who are dug in and well rested, and they're ready to either defend or to do who knows what. Bakhmut was a disaster for Ukraine, a disaster. And every time I see memes on like Twitter from like pro-Ukrainian sources, and they're happy that Bakhmut holds. They say Bakhmut holds. I'm like,
NAFO loves that.
I'm like, why? Why are you guys celebrating this? Don't you see the trap that's been set up? Don't you see what they're doing to you? But no, they couldn't see it.
Well, what's astounding too is this Reuters report that came out earlier today. For those of you watching maybe later, May 19th, they're saying that Ukraine set up a mousetrap for Wagner. Yeah. It to me, it doesn't make any sense, given that even in the same article, they'll talk about how they'll just say Wagner reports that they still hold the majority of the territory. But you go to the New York Times, you go somewhere else, and they'll say, actually, no, Wagner does hold the majority of the territory. So that level, I mean, your reactions to that, it just seems like there's so much projection going on, and it gets back to this desperation almost that we're talking about of controlling this narrative.
Yes, I mean, I think the other thing to say about Reuters is, of course, it's a British news agency, and the British are particularly invested in this war. And Reuters, I'm going to say it straightforwardly, has always been extremely close to the British government and basically follows the official line. So what the British especially like to do is they take the realities on the ground and they try to reverse them. So Bakhmut has been a trap. It's been a place where the Russians have ground the Ukrainians down. This is obvious to anybody who's been following the situation in the way that Alex has described. It's been obvious for months. And of course, the British Reuters take that story and they turn it upside down. It's a Ukrainian trap. They drew the Russians in there. They ground the Russians down. I don't think anybody who's followed this battle with any degree of attention believes it.
Yeah, and lastly on Bakhmut, once it does fall, I know that you all have been talking about this. What will it mean? I mean, what will it mean for the future of the fighting in particular? Because Ukraine likes to say that they're the ones, and of course Reuters too likes to help them out and say, yeah, we're the ones who are drawing Russia into this trap. But traps are not meant to be used for months and months and months. I would think that traps are meant to then build forward and, kind of decisively defeat your enemy if you've trapped them. But what will it mean when Russia actually does take these last, I think, what is it, like 1,000 people in a couple of buildings or something or other, hundreds of people? Yeah, like what happens then?
Well, can I just quickly say this? I mean, I think that we now have an explanation from the Russians, this argument between the chief of the Wagner PMC, Prigozhin, and the Russian Defense Ministry has actually explained a lot about what Russian plans in Bachmut were. Apparently, they decided to do this back in October. And this was at the time when Ukraine was carrying out all those offensives. The Russians needed time to reorganize, to fortify, to build up their forces, to train the hundreds of thousands of reservists that they'd called up. So the Russian general and overall command, a man called Surovikin, had this discussion with Prigozhin, and they came up with this plan. We're going to create this trap for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut. Our objective is not so much to capture this particular town, it's to get the Ukrainians to defend it week after week, month after month, bleed them dry, and that will do exactly what Alex says. It will give us time to train up our forces, re-equip, re-fortify, do all of those things. And I think it's exceeded their expectations because the Ukrainians went on falling into this trap week after week, month after month, long past the point that the Russians expected. And the Russians, who perhaps were not really so fixed back in October on capturing Bakhmut, because that wasn't the original plan, now find that they're about to capture Bachman. And we've discussed its importance many times. The point about Bakhmut is it's part of the hub of the transportation systems. It links together all the Ukrainian defense lines in Donbass. I personally think what the Russians will do is that they've captured it, they'll clear all the surrounding villages, they'll consolidate their control, and then they will wait, which is what their consistent pattern has been. And then they will see off this Ukrainian offensive, and that will put them in a stronger position once they hold Bakhmut to push further west. But that, I think, is their most likely plan based on what I know.
Yeah, I mean, Zelensky, he put himself in a media box with Bakhmut, in a propaganda media box. He went to the United States in December. He went in front of Congress. He said that Bakhmut was going to be the turning point. His words, not mine. That is what he told Congress. That is what he told the Democrats, the Republicans. That's what he told the American people. He turned around, looked at Kamala Harris, presented her, I think it was Nancy Pelosi was there too, presented them with the flag signed by the Bakhmut soldiers in Ukraine. And everyone stood up and they were clapping. And Bakhmut was going to be the turning point of this entire conflict. And he put himself, the entire collective West, all of NATO, they put themselves in a media box, a media hole with Bakhmut. And even if you believe the narrative that Bakhmut is a trap for Wagner, okay, it's a trap. What exactly was the trap? That Wagner ends up taking the entire city? Is that the trap? even if the losses are 1-to-1, I don't know. Let's just say the losses are equal. What's the trap exactly? That Russia still has 500,000 Russian military ready and waiting, while Ukraine's military has been completely committed to this one city? I mean, what exactly is the trap that they set up for the Russians, for the Russian military, for the Russian Federation? It doesn't make any sense at all. This was a media trap that they themselves created to themselves.
Yeah, and speaking of narrative management, because that's what it seems like a lot of it is Bakhmut there's this narrative to it. But Zelensky's been going all around the world. I know you two have been covering this quite closely. He was in Europe, he was in the Netherlands, he was in the UK, he was everywhere begging for weapons, get me more weapons, support the war effort. Of course, all of the European vassal states said, of course we will, of course. And there's been some subsequent begging around getting the United States to give an okay to things like F-16s. Now he is in Saudi Arabia, going to the G7 in Hiroshima very soon, because that's about to kick off at any minute. Tell me about this Zelensky world tour. Like, why is it happening? Because it's curious timing. There were all these terrorist attacks, including the Kremlin attack, that Ukraine was for sure involved in. And it came, just after there's a lot of stirrings in the Ukrainian government about certain positions and cabinet members, etc. I mean, Zelensky goes around, you mentioned the Congress visit as this, he's like this, he's in the military fatigue and the sweater, and he's like, I'm confident, and sometimes it sounds like he's lecturing his own masters, but like these trips, it sounds like he's not coming back to Kiev anytime soon. Like, why? Why? Like, why not? Like, that seems like a very strange thing for someone who's been painted by the collective West as this. You remember early in the conflict, in the trenches, he's in Donbass, he's on the front lines. That seems to be a far cry from that period where we're at now.
Alex, do you want to answer this one, because you do it? You explained it very well.
No, I mean we just did a program on this, and I mean, look, he doesn't want to be in Kiev. We did a video 2 days ago, and I asked Alexander this question. We were talking about Zelensky flying to Kiev. That wasn't when he was coming back from Europe to Kiev. And I asked Alexander, I'm like, do you think he's going to stay in Kiev long? And Alexander says, I bet you the first opportunity he gets to leave Ukraine, he's going to take it. 2 days later, he's in Saudi Arabia, and he's going to go to Japan. He doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be there. The guy looks terrible. He looks awful. He looks wasted. The collective West is panicking. They don't know what to do. Might as well go on a trip. What else can he do?
I mean, he clearly doesn't want to be in Kiev. He's got political rumblings there. His commander of his army, General Zelensky, has all but disappeared. His commander of his ground forces, General Zelenskys, has all but disappeared also. I mean, these people have not been seen. They're not been visible in public for days. And there's rumors about both of them. And he's got this rather alarming personality, Kirill Budanov, who is the intelligence chief, who's appearing all over the place. And he's said to be the person behind all these attacks that have been happening in Russia, the attack on the Kremlin and all of these things. And he's said to be a rather, shall we say, alarming person. So he doesn't want to be close to him, one senses. And he's also, I think, afraid that with the air defense system in Kiev, let's put it like this, not in good shape, he doesn't want to be around in case the Russians get really angry. I mean, when he sent his drones, when the drones went to the Kremlin, he was in Finland. He suddenly turned up in Finland. Nobody really knows why he was in Finland. There was no explanation, actually, of why he went to Finland. It wasn't really announced in advance. He suddenly turned up, suddenly, mysteriously, in Finland. And then he went off to The Hague, to the Netherlands. Nobody quite knows why. And then he was in Rome. And then he went to London. And then he went to Berlin. And then he went, as Alex said, to Kiev. Then immediately he left Kiev and went to Saudi Arabia. And then he's going on from Saudi Arabia to Japan. And if you actually drill down, there's no reason behind these visits. Yes, of course, he talks about F-16s and other weapons all the time. But nobody should make the mistake of, I think, connecting Zelensky's road trips with particular weapons acquisitions. It's basically he doesn't want to be in Kiev anymore. The place is dangerous for him. It's dangerous because he's afraid of the Russians. It's dangerous because he's afraid of some of the people on his own side. And he doesn't want to stay. So he's already trying to keep as much distance from himself as possible. And of course, he doesn't want to be there when the debacle in Bachman hits, and he wants to postpone the offensive as well. So that's why he's on his tour, on these tours.
Yeah, it seems definitely that Zelensky doesn't have to beg for weapons from the collective West. They'll give what they want and what they can. I mean, he won't maybe get everything he wants, but at the same time, he doesn't necessarily have to beg. They'll trickle in whatever they can trickle in. There is just something very astounding about him being gone all of this time. It's a pretty crucial time in the conflict, just being gone, nowhere to be seen, and just making these tours that don't feel inspiring. It's, the whole Congress theatrical visit, all of that was supposed to garner inspiration, but this does feel like hiding. It does feel like hiding, especially since it coincided with that Kremlin attack, especially. But I wanted to play what he said. I know, Alex, you put this in your recent program. It's a incredible, for someone who looks so bad and who's honestly doing so poorly. Definitely want your reactions to what he is saying at the Arab League summit. He seems to be giving a lecture to the Arab countries about the conflict and how they should be behaving in it. Well, let's play. It's only about a minute, and then definitely want your take on this. Not really working. Let me see if I can reload it. strange. You can't hear that, can you? No. All right. Well, let's then let's just table this. For some reason, the screen share is not working. In any event,
he was basically, I mean, he was basically lecturing the Arab League, and he was talking about Crimea and how Crimea is the main Muslim region for Ukraine, and then he went off about how, I mean, he basically said that the members of the Arab League are kind of ignorant to the fact that Putin is such a bad guy. And he's like, I'm going to come here to lecture all of you guys and let you know that you've been deceived by Putin and you're a bunch of dummies and I'm the smart guy and Putin's a criminal, and let's just all agree to that. That was pretty much what he said. You could see MBS in the video. He was just kind of like, oh, why do I do these things? Why did I invite this guy here? It was very, very embarrassing. But it works out great for Russia, because Zelensky reminds me, and I was telling Alexander this today, he reminds me of Hillary Clinton. The more he speaks, the more he opens up his mouth, the more people hate him. He's not a likable person. He just isn't a likable person, period. Maybe he was a good actor. Maybe he was good on screen. Maybe he was good on TV shows. He's good if you keep him in a box, if you give him a script, if you control what he says, if you direct him. But the minute you put him out in the wild and he just starts talking and he just starts saying stuff or provides icons with avoided Jesus to the Pope or stuff like that, he completely falls apart. And people look at him and they say, I really don't like this guy. Why am I sending $100 billion to him? This is a problem for the collective West.
I completely agree. I mean, even when he came to London, and bear in mind, there is no more pro-Zelensky capital, at least as far as the political class is concerned, than London. But when he came to London a couple of months ago, I mean, it didn't go down well at all. His performance here, I can remember even a commentary started to appear in the British media, of all places, the mainstream media, being critical of him. And there was one which said that he plays the British elite like a violin. In other words, that he's deeply manipulative and very cynical and frankly corrupt, and we shouldn't have anything to do with him. And he was in France. There were comic programs about him on French television. They were talking about the Zelensky circus. He does not make a good impression. I don't think he made a good impression when he was in the United States. I think his appearance in Congress didn't go down especially well. So I think you're absolutely right, Alex. I mean, if I can say, I think this is exactly the impression. It's a bad impression. And the way he was talking to the Arab leaders is, it is deeply insulting to the Arab leaders. It's basically telling these people, no, you're too stupid to understand the situation. I'm the hero. Putin is this demon king. This is just after they've agreed to readmit Syria into the Arab League. MBS has just done this deal with Iran. The Saudis are friends with Russia. They got good relations with China. And here comes Zelensky, and he's basically telling them, you got it all wrong. You don't understand. I'm the person who knows. You should listen to what I have to say. And, Crimea is all about, Islam and all that. They must have been absolutely furious. MBS, I was watching his expression as well. And it's exactly as Alex described it. I mean, he was saying, why do I do this to myself? But I think deep down, the Arabs must be extremely angry. And all those Arab leaders must be absolutely furious.
I mean, yeah, it's the Arab League summit, not the Zelensky League. So it's just why that he would go there with that kind. It's contemptuous. It's like contempt, really, is how he was sounding. But do you feel like the United States might have nudged Saudi Arabia a little bit, like, hey, I know things are kind of rough right now. Could you just help us out just this single time, please? Because it's like, why is he even there? Like, why is he there? Why does he have to be there? it seems like that, much of the world has been very neutral, if not outright just opposed to giving support to Ukraine, especially the Arab world. So why was he there?
Well, I think what happened was that the Saudis were taking this neutral position, as they said, over the conflict, which isn't really a neutral position at all, because neutrality in this kind of conflict means basically being on good terms with the Russians, which, of course, for the US is unacceptable. They were very angry about it. So I think they were saying to MBS and the Saudis, well, look, if you're really neutral, prove it to us. You should talk to Zelensky as well as to Putin. And I think very unwisely, or at least maybe not unwisely, maybe it made sense for them at the time, but they extended Zelensky this invitation. I understand this was done some time ago. And, he decides out of the blue to take them up on it. And that's why he ended up in Saudi Arabia at the time when there was the Arab League meeting. So he didn't really have a reason to go. I mean, he had no actual proposal to make. He had no new ideas. He certainly wasn't looking to explore any peace plans or anything like that. I mean, he's not capable of doing that sort of thing. But he just turned up because, well, it's what Alex said. He doesn't want to be in Kiev, and he got this invitation from Saudi Arabia, so he thought he'd go and extend his trip to Japan by an extra day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess perhaps we can move on to some other tours that are happening. We've spoken a lot about Ukraine to begin the program. But maybe we can begin with you, Alexander. Beloved Liz Truss, a former 45-day long prime minister of the UK, traveled early this past week to Taiwan. And out of that has come, of course, the usual bluster, as Western politicians have been doing. Democracy, freedom, Taiwan on the front lines against authoritarianism in China. But there's also a call for an economic NATO, she called it, of sorts, where she's calling out the collective West to get even tougher on China, as they have been with Russia. So, Alexander, you're in that political space, fortunately or unfortunately. What is your reaction to this? Because Liz Truss, it just feels like what Liz Truss is doing. I don't know. I guess it leaves me kind of speechless about how she kind of hit all the points too, right, around China.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels very coordinated.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing to say is that Liz Truss, in British political terms, is, as of this time, a discredited figure. I mean, she is a completely inconsequential person. If you go to the British media, the mainstream media here, they have barely covered this trip at all. This isn't something that they're interested in, not because they are sympathetic to China or they're not sympathetic to Taiwan. It is because, frankly, anything to do with Liz Truss in Britain is toxic. I mean, she's Mad Queen Liz. She's sometimes actually referred to here in London. So we don't really want to talk about her. Her going to Taiwan, for us, it's an embarrassment. It's a reminder of this absolutely preposterous 45-day premiership, which exploded in this bizarre fashion. So in that respect, this is an inconsequential visit. But unfortunately, there is an other side to this, which is, why did Liz Truss go to Taiwan? Why is she saying all of these things? Because, of course, the reason she's doing it is that she doesn't accept that she's discredited. She doesn't accept that her political career is over. She's saying these things because she wants to win back support within the Conservative Party and within the political leadership in London. And she is, despite everything that people say, a politician. And she has understood that within British politics today, at the very highest level, there is a very strong sentiment that Britain, just as it took the lead over Ukraine, being more pro-Ukrainian even than the United States, it should try and be more pro-Taiwanese even than the United States should be. So she is trying to play to that particular audience. The fact that nobody pays any attention to her act should not fool us about the fact that that audience is there. They may not take her seriously, but they like the things that she's saying. And that is a very concerning thing. That is a very, very worrying thing. And if you follow the media here in London, you can see this steady build up, this drumbeat of hostility to China. It's growing by the day. And economic NATOs, extending NATO to the Pacific, sending British warships to the South China Sea, intervening in some extraordinary way in Taiwan, getting NATO involved in the Pacific and in Taiwan, building up the relationships, the AUKUS relationship, all of that. I'm afraid all of that is being talked about in London now all the time and very seriously. And I personally am absolutely horrified by it. I think it's one of the most reckless and irresponsible things that one can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, she gets a jump on the conflict in China, or the conflict with China over Taiwan, Project Taiwan, let's call it. She gets an early start on it, and she probably thinks it's going to do her political career good if she gets in on it early. She's been talking about expanding NATO for a while now. I think when she was prime minister, she was talking about NATO Asia and NATO to contain China and all of this stuff. Why do the Taiwanese give her a platform? I don't know. They should just deny her visa. Just, you can't come here. Period. You can't come here.
Yeah.
That would be so much more constructive than having her visit Taiwan and try to stir up trouble. And that's what she's trying to do. At the end of the day, she's just trying to stir up trouble for her own political future, and because her NATO masters are probably telling her to go over there. Go to Taiwan, stir up trouble, and you'll get some brownie points from us, and your political career will look a lot brighter with the Conservative Party. Probably told her something like that, and she's so dumb that she said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it."
I think Alex has just made a very good point, by the way. I mean, the fact that she was in Taiwan shows that the Taiwanese authorities are not particularly don't understand very well the politics in London, because if they think that they were hosting an important person in British politics, I can tell them straight away they are not. As I said, no one here takes Liz Truss seriously anymore. But that doesn't mean that this thing isn't concerning. As I said, the trend in British politics is concerning. And of course, the Taiwanese, even if they haven't quite got the correct measure of Liz Truss, they're clearly playing to it as much as they possibly can. And it's very bad for Britain. That goes without saying. But it's absolutely potentially disastrous for Taiwan.
Yeah, and her rhetoric, she's doing what a lot of, Pelosi did it, and then, Tsai Ing-wen was in the United States, and a lot of European officials have been talking about, let me go on a jaunt to Taiwan to kind of poke China and anger China. But what Liz Truss said, it felt more just overtly supported for Taiwan independence, quote unquote, or like for war, really, because when US readouts are very unremarkable and usually don't say much, but even in the way that, let's say, a Pelosi would speak about this, much more narrow, vague, but Liz Truss was hitting on all of these points directly provocative towards China. What explains the difference there? Because of course this is the US's game. It's the US's agenda in Taiwan, around Taiwan to poke China, be aggressive with China. But Liz Truss seemed to be very just intensely extreme on this, to a point, to something that is not generally, I would think, like kind of a regular occurrence. It seems pretty unique in that way.
Well, this is exactly the problem. The British they did the same with Ukraine. Their rhetoric over Ukraine was and continues to be even more aggressive. In fact, much more aggressive than the American rhetoric. And of course, the same is true about Taiwan. So the US plays this complex game. We pretend that we support the one China policy, even if we are actually undermining it. The British come out straightforwardly and say we support Taiwanese independence, knowing perfectly well that this is going to make the situation more tense, more difficult in the Pacific, might not even be exactly what Washington wants. Why do the British do it? The British do it because they sense that they are becoming marginal in international affairs. And I think that's the key point to understand. Britain has experienced over the last couple of years a sudden major drop in international influence and international power. So they want to compensate for that by appearing tougher, stronger, more aggressive, even than the mighty United States itself. And they hope that they can involve the United States in a real crisis in the Pacific, just as in Ukraine, because that way they can then pose even more as the Churchillian strong guys who are pushing this thing further even than the United States. So they're the people who are they're the strong, disciplined, heroic people. If the Americans wobble a bit, well, they need British steel to keep them going. I mean, to my mind, this is a ridiculous, dangerous fantasy. If you see the state of the British military, there was a report that we would have trouble finding 25,000 men to put into the field. 25,000, less than Ukraine has deployed in Bachman to defend the town. So, I mean, 25,000 men into the field. We might not even be able to do that within a period of 5 years, finding all the equipment to supply them. Our premier aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth II, its engines don't work. It's always breaking down. It doesn't even have fighter jets. It has to borrow them from the US. So this is a stupid game that we are playing, but it is one which I am sorry to say the British political class is playing in the way that it is in order to persuade itself that it is still important and still powerful, and to convey that impression to the world.
Yeah, I mean, what else can I add to that? They did the same stuff with Ukraine. They did the same escalation with Ukraine. They're just doing the same thing now with Taiwan and China, and it's even worse because at least you could make an argument that Ukraine is close to Europe, and at least you could say, okay, it's part of our neighborhood. You can make that argument if you really wanted to stretch things out. But going to China and going to Taiwan, what are you doing there? Are you traveling 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles? I don't know how far away it is. So you can stir up trouble with Taiwan and China? Why? Why? Well, it doesn't make any sense. But the British elite, I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong on this, but they just fall over themselves to impress who? The Biden White House? Why? Who in their right mind wants to impress the Biden White House? But there they are. They weren't acting like this under Trump, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know, but with the Biden White House, I mean, they're like, well, how much more aggressive can we get so we can win favor with Biden and Blinken and Victoria Nuland? I mean, it's just insanity. They don't have eyes. Yes. They don't see Biden. No. They don't see the guy walk and talk. I just don't understand this mentality.
Well, I'm going to say, I mean, it goes back some time. I mean, I remember in 2017 when there was the siege of Aleppo, the British Parliament held a debate, and they were saying that, we must launch an air attack to break the siege of Aleppo, even if the Russian Air Force is there. we must take on the Russian Air Force. I mean, crazy stuff. And then when the Biden administration, when Afghanistan collapsed, again, the British Parliament met, and there was a huge debate, and there was talk about Britain fighting on by itself in Afghanistan, even after the Americans had pulled out, and we would have won in Afghanistan all by ourselves, but the Biden people didn't let us do it. I mean, this is so detached from reality that it is shocking. And the problem is that in London, there is nobody in political authority who is prepared to come out and say that this is absurd. And it's all the media here repeat this nonsense. The political parties repeat this nonsense. They all want to pose, as I said, as if it's Churchill. They're all, each one of them is Churchill. This is 1940 all over again. The British single-handedly are fighting China, single-handedly fighting Russia, and the Americans, well, they'll have to come to our rescue because we're the people who are brave and good. It's a stupid, absurd policy, and it frankly embarrasses me as a British person.
Can I just make one more point, Danny? The real tragedy with Britain and all of this is that they had a golden opportunity after Brexit.
Yeah.
Fighting with Russia, fighting with China. They should have been doing business with Russia and doing business with China after Brexit. Boy, did they squander a golden opportunity. I mean, this is one of the greatest geopolitical fails in all of history. They got Brexit. They were out of the EU. They were open for business. And boy, did they ruin everything. I mean, what a fail the whole Brexit thing was. They just should have not gone through with it. If I had known they would have gone in this direction, I would have been pro Remain. I would have been like, just stay where you are because
I mean, it's like out of the EU into the US's arms. It seems like. But anyway, Alexander, I know you were going to say something.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. But I think to a great extent, this extraordinary turn in direction is a product of Brexit, because, of course, the British political class overwhelmingly opposed Brexit. And, having had Brexit forced on them, they have gone, become collectively they're getting more and more extreme in what they do, because they don't want to carry out Brexit. They don't believe in it. It isn't what they were there to do. So what do they do instead? Well, they try to persuade the Americans, in spite of the fact that we've had Brexit and we don't know what to do with it, we're still a force to be reckoned with. So let's go after China. Let's talk about China and, the dragon in Taiwan. It's going to swallow Taiwan, this heroic democracy. And that will make us feel at least good with ourselves and persuade us that even though we've messed up Brexit and have disillusioned our people and our economies all over the place, nonetheless, we still matter. We're still important in the world.
I wanted to ask, out of this Truss visit, I mean, do you feel like with, a lot of people have been speculating about Taiwan being like a Ukraine scenario, that the collective West, the United States leading it, is building up toward a similar situation? Of course, we can talk, forever about the particularities, the differences between Ukraine and Taiwan. But overall, it seems like a lot of people are picking up on there are similar preparations, and now there's been all kinds of leaks about plans to kind of spark a war with China over Taiwan from various places. You even have Jungle Joseph Borrell talking about things like this, talking about, being more aggressive toward China. And then Truss's visit comes as the G7 is meeting. As uninfluential as Truss may be, she sure timed that pretty well. So I'm wondering your reaction is, or your thoughts are on building kind of a Ukraine-style conflict with China over Taiwan.
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, if you read the rhetoric, in Britain and indeed in the United States, far too many people now are talking about conflict with China over Taiwan as a given. It's something that they expect to happen. They don't just expect it to happen. One senses deep down they want it to happen. And the thing to understand about Ukraine is that Ukraine isn't about Ukraine. To some extent, it's about Russia. Ultimately, it's about China. China is what has spooked them because the British, to some extent, the Americans, obviously, to a much greater extent, they've become accustomed for decades to thinking of themselves as the biggest, most powerful, wealthiest country in the world. Now they're confronted by a country which is potentially even more powerful than they are. Its manufacturing output, I've recently discovered, is greater than that of the United States, the European Union, and Japan combined. And this is very unnerving indeed. So you've got to find some way of reversing that. So you start a conflict in Ukraine because you think you can split Russia away from China that way, and you can deprive China of access to Russian raw materials, except of course it hasn't. So you've got to find some other way of hitting at the Chinese. So you're going to try and do it by create a crisis over Taiwan and hope that this time it does derail China in some way. Now, this is, in my opinion, irrational thinking. It is irrational and it is reckless. But if you read and listen to the way these people speak, you see that they are actually hungering for this conflict now. Irrational and dangerous though that is in every respect. And just as they've underestimated Russia, they thought, a couple of sanctions on Russia and the economy there would collapse, like a pancake. They're thinking the same about China. They're talking every day. You read in the newspapers here now about the enormous problems the Chinese economy is supposedly experiencing. It can't, withstand the smallest sanctions blow. We are really the ones in the strong position. All we need to do is to take action. And of course, the Chinese will be exposed as the, paper tiger that they actually are. And I think this is one of the, it is one colossal miscalculation on top of what was already a great one. I mean, they got Russia wrong. They're going to get China even more wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're absolutely gearing up for conflict with China. I mean, you saw it in the lead up to the conflict with Russia. It was the media narrative of Putin, the evil autocrat, and Putin, the dictator who poisons the Skripals and puts Navalny in jail and all of these things about Putin that they were saying, and he's worth $500 billion. And they were prepping the whole war with Russia, and they were demonizing the Russian people via these crazy narratives about Putin. I think China is going to be an even easier sell, attacking, going after the communist Chinese who are coming after our position as the hegemon, as the world leader, and it's going to be very, very easy to sell to the public a conflict with China. Actually, I think it'll be easier to sell a conflict with China than it was to sell a conflict with Russia, and you can see it every day in the news. The communist Chinese, the evil Xi Jinping, the president for life Xi Jinping, and then you have the Uyghur narrative, and they've woven in so many different narratives into the China story that they have to be preparing for something. They wouldn't take up this much time to create these narratives if they weren't preparing for an eventual conflict.
Yeah, and Liz Truss hit on all of those points on her visit to Taiwan, and there's been so many leaked memos, and I know you covered the James Bierman over in Japan, talking about how, top commander out there talking about how Asia Pacific is really just a theater for war with China. And then Mike Minahan, the leaked memo of the Air Force preparing to shoot for the head at China. You know, it certainly is seeming like they are preparing for conflict. And I think what's so interesting about it is, as you said, Alexander, there's all these scare stories about how badly the Chinese economy is doing. I even saw one recently in the mainstream media talking about how China's peak they've reached their peak, and it's only going down from here. But at the same time, there's also, you know, all of these preparations for outright war with China. And to me, that's astounding because, you know, maybe last comments on this. What happened with Russia was very damaging to Europe and in large respects the United States too, because the United States has had much more trouble with inflation and other things because of sanctions on Russia. It's certainly played a factor. China is a different kind of situation. It seems like if you decouple from China, if you try to detach from China, you are going to be in a world of hurt. And I think there is some divides even among Europe on that. Like you'll have Baerbock try to talk down to Qin Gang in Beijing, saying we need to de-risk and from you. And then you also have murmurs that there's a lot of European officials who are saying, no, we just need to keep going the course economically with China, even if we do subscribe to some of the aggressive elements of the US's agenda. So your reaction, your thoughts on the situation there with Europe and China and in this Taiwan situation?
Well, the simple position is, if Europe were approaching this in a rational way, looking at economics, I mean, they've already had a bloody nose, to be frank, about the economic sanctions on Russia. I mean, that they have not turned out at all well. Russia, however, important economically as it was because of its supply of cheap energy to the EU, doesn't come close to being as important as China is. China is Europe's biggest trade partner. It's bigger trade partner than the United States is. This is people don't perhaps fully understand. If you're going to create an economic war with your biggest trade partner, the effects are going to be simply enormous. They are going to completely derail the entire European economic system. And you're getting all kinds of rumors, reports, suggestions that across Europe, business people who were not happy with the economic war with Moscow, but who went along with it because, well, frankly, they weren't prepared to risk everything politically by appearing to side with, Putin. This time, they're pushing back a lot more. They're saying, we cannot afford an economic war with the Chinese. This just doesn't make any kind of sense. It would be a disaster for us if we went there. The problem is that the political class in Europe has ceased to think in terms of living standards, economics, what is rational in economic terms. It's become much more ideological and much more Atlanticist in the worst sense than it has ever been. And from their point of view, if the United States, if the people that they are ideologically close to in the United States see a challenge in China, they will see a challenge in China as well. So you have people like Josep Borrell coming up with the kind of statements that he does. And I have to say, these are the people who are in political control. They hold the levers of power. They control the foreign ministries. They control the chancelleries. They make the ultimate political decisions. So it would be a disaster for Europe. There would be a pushback within Europe. But don't expect sanity and reason to prevail in this situation. With the European Union, it never does.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this: if Biden is God help us if he's reelected, then yeah, I think there's going to be conflict with China. I think Robert Kennedy Jr., Trump, I'm optimistic that they'll find a way out of conflict with China. I'm not saying it's a definite, but I'm more optimistic with either of them being president. A lot more optimistic that Robert Kennedy Jr. and Trump would not go for conflict with China. They would probably, if Ukraine is still going on, they would definitely try to wind that down as well. And I say the word try to wind that down because there'll be a lot of forces pushing back on them as well. But if you were, let's just say you were to get another 4 years of Biden, then yeah, absolutely, you're going to get a conflict with China. I mean, it's baked in the cake. Europe's not going to do anything. Europe allowed their own pipeline to get destroyed by the Biden White House, and they did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. So will they let their industries and their economies get destroyed for the sake of pleasing the neocons and the neolibs? Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. At the end of the day, the European elites, they don't think of it in terms of, my country is going to suffer or my people are going to suffer. They don't think like that anymore. No. They're like, what do I care? What do I care if my people are going to suffer, if they have to go through inflation, or if housing gets too expensive or energy gets too expensive? They really, really don't care anymore. And it's obvious. And that goes across all parties. I don't care if the party is right or center or left. They're all the same now. They're all the same uniparty in any country in Europe you go to, with the exception of Orban in Hungary. Yeah. I think that's the only country that stands out. Every other country is the same uniparty.
I mean, they collectively conceive of themselves as part of a project. That project is the collective West, the whatever it is, the globalist system. We'll call it whatever you like, but they conceive of themselves in those terms. They're not concerned about anything else, ultimately, than the success of this project of which they are a part. That is what, if you listen to Liz Truss, that is what she was signaling. It's a sort of collective endeavor. We're not going to be the ones who are going to let the side down by opting out of it. So, if there's a clash with China over Taiwan, we're not going to pull back because we're part of the same project. So we have to be there with the Americans and all the others. Now, of course, this is a complete reversal. During the Cold War, a country like Britain, for example, used to act as a moderating influence. I mean, they would be friends with the United States, but in the 1950s, it's well known, for example, that Churchill and his cabinet actually took a moderating position with the US over Korea. And in the 1960s, they were also, they refused, the Labour cabinet at that time, Harold Wilson's, opposed escalation over Vietnam. De Gaulle openly criticized American policy over Vietnam, said that this was mistaken. You had Germany pursuing Ostpolitik. They were all allies, but they were actual allies. They didn't conceive of themselves in the way that they do now as a single project. And yes, there are critics of these positions in Europe, but everywhere they've been marginalized. If you talk about Britain, the two political leaders who were at one time critical of these policies, one was Nigel Farage, the other was Jeremy Corbyn, one on the right, the other on the left. You don't see or hear from them anymore.
No, it's both, totally suppressed and pretty viciously. And to your point, Alex, when you were saying confidence in RFK Jr. and Trump, even regardless of ideology, whatever they think in their heads, I know some have been more vocal. Both of them have been pretty vocal in opposition, but to the Ukraine conflict and keeping the U.S. in it. But even just the kind of chaos that would come about internally does create huge problems. And And I think we saw that under Trump, that the U.S., regardless of what it was able to do, Soleimani and some other things, it was bogged down in many different areas that certainly there are pretty powerful forces that do not want to see that happen again. And I think, this collective West like project, there's such there's powerful economic interests that are so invested in keeping this going, keeping the Taiwan thing going. I mean, just the military industrial complex alone does not want to turn off the spigot, because it's one that keeps on giving. They can keep on milking the United States, the EU, these governments for more and more and more money, regardless of conflict readiness for them. I don't even think that doesn't factor in as much, if at all, really, given what we've learned now in Ukraine. But I wanted to ask one more topic, because you've been very generous with your time, and I definitely want to, I know it's getting late where you all are, but it's not being talked about too much in the mainstream media. We referenced it a bit with regard to Zelensky's invitation, whatever it was, to the Arab League. But Syria is pretty big news. Syria reinstated back into the Arab League a week after about Saudi Arabia and Syria normalizing ties. And you both have talked about, and I've talked about here, the flurry of developments largely relating to Saudi Arabia and its posture and orientation toward Russia. And then you've also had like Turkey-Syria negotiations, the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal in Beijing. So many developments that have caused pretty much a seismic shift in the Middle East, politically, militarily, economically. But this is pretty big news. Bashar al-Assad being able to go to the Arab League for the first time in more than 12 years. Like, your thoughts on this? What does it signify? Because to be honest, from my assessment of the mainstream media landscape in the collective West, it's been pretty quiet. There's, of course, been anger about it, and a lot of John Kirby saying that's not good, but it really hasn't been a story.
Well, just to say, first of all, that this is huge news. I mean, it's extraordinary how little there is talk about this, because, of course, 5 years ago, the Syrian war was the big international news story. I mean, this is the most important thing. And now we've lost, because the whole point, I say we, I mean, people, the collective West has lost, because they made this huge effort to overthrow the president of Syria, change the government there, create a completely new situation in Syria as part of this project for the new Middle East. And it's failed, and it's failed utterly. So what do? We don't talk about it. We have a few angry articles in a few places. There was a particularly deranged one by one of our commentators here in Britain, Simon Tisdall, who says, we should have gone in all guns blazing and all that. But apart from him and a few people like that, the basic line is silence. We don't want to talk about it. That was the war. We lost. We now move on to the next one, which is Ukraine. And of course, if the Ukraine war isn't successful, well, we're going to do the same. That Politico article I was talking about before, which said, politically palatable solution. One of the reasons why they were talking about freezing the conflict as a politically palatable solution, and it actually says it in the Politico article, is because that way people will forget it. They will forget about the war in Ukraine, just as they've forgotten about the war in Syria. But because in the West we've forgotten about this war in Syria, we should not. It has been an extraordinary transformation, and it has happened for multiple reasons. One, because of the Syrian government's resilience and that of President Assad, and we should not overlook that. The second is because of the Russian intervention. The third is because of the influence of China and the effect that is having. And for me, perhaps the most striking comment that has been made about this event was one that appeared in an editorial in Global Times, which obviously Assad's rehabilitation is a sign of the decline of American influence in the Middle East. And Global Times said, as the shadow of America withdraws, the dawn of peace in the Middle East comes. And that was a pretty remarkable thing to see. And it's true.
Yeah, I agree with everything Alexander said. A thought just came into my mind. I wouldn't be shocked if part of the reason to get Zelensky to Saudi Arabia, to the Arab League, was so that they can present an alternative narrative to Assad at the Arab League, so that the collective West mainstream media can run with stories about Zelensky at the Arab League and can conveniently ignore having to cover Assad at the Arab League. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of thinking there at the State Department with Zelensky accepting the invitation to go to the Arab League in order to conveniently ignore Assad's presence there. We forget about Syria. We forget about Libya and what they did to Gaddafi. We forget about the fact that I remember it very well. IS was 18 kilometers from Damascus, but Assad was still there.
Yeah,
he didn't leave. He didn't flee. He wasn't traveling the world. He wasn't wearing a green sweatshirt and making green screen television appearances on Instagram or TikTok. He wasn't doing any of these stuff. He was there, and they were 18 kilometers away. And then I remember Russia said, okay, we have to do something. And not only Russia, Iran as well. I think Iran is the missing piece to the puzzle, because when you take BRICS, when you take China and Russia and India, South Africa, Brazil, but then you add in Iran, I think you've got a very powerful bloc that the collective West is not going to be able to contend with. But the Syrian military, Assad, the Russians, with the help of the Russians and the Iranians, they pushed back IS. And we can never forget that at the time, the collective West media was telling us that these were what was the term? The moderate rebels. The moderate rebels, right? The same script writing stuff that we see in Ukraine, all the same stuff. Obama's funding the moderate rebels. Okay, if they're the moderate rebels, then they're okay. Of course, it was Al-Qaeda and it was IS and it was all of these forces trying to overthrow Assad. And then when Assad started to win decisively, what did you get? You got Ghouta and Duma and I don't know, Alexander, what were the other chemical attacks? And everyone was scratching their head going, why would Assad do that when he's like right on the verge of completely annihilating IS and Al-Qaeda? Why would he do that to his own people? It doesn't make any sense. But you trotted out the CNN reporter who was at some camp or something, and she smells the backpack and she goes, oh yeah, there's chemicals on that backpack, no doubt about it. And everyone's like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And Samantha Power was at the UN holding not Samantha Power, what was her name? Running for president right now.
Nikki Haley.
Yeah,
right.
She's there holding up pictures. The same exact copy-paste stuff that you see in Ukraine, and the same exact copy-paste stuff that they're going to push to China and Taiwan. The same scripts, just change the names, change a bit the scenarios and the locations, but the scripts are all the same.
Yeah, and these scripts are the same, but it seems like the outcomes now expose almost like this fragility, for lack of a better term, of American power in particular, because I want to play a quick video. It wasn't too long ago. This was just 6 years ago when you had people like Brian Williams. Let's see if the screen share volume will work. This is Trump was when he was celebrated by the mainstream media. It was because his administration was, sending missiles and rockets on Syrian airfields. But Brian Williams, I don't know if you all remember this. This is how he described this is media, by the way, everybody. This is supposedly journalism, but it's only a couple of seconds.
go into greater detail. We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, "I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons." And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments making what is for them a brief flight over to this airfield. What did they hit? What are you convinced?
So the beauty of our weapons, and what's so astounding about this is now fast forward 6 years later, and this war seems to be all but lost for the United States. Like this is it really. And I'm not surprised, Alex, your point on kind of getting you got to get Zelensky somewhere. Why not have it have some benefit to the narrative around the Arab League? But anyway, your thoughts on this trajectory? You know, it's like U.S. wars aren't generally supposed to end like this.
Absolutely. Well, this war is lost. And I think this is an important thing to understand. Assad being invited to the Arab League, Syria rejoining the Arab League, is the end of the Syrian war. There are Turkish troops still in the north, but Turkey wants to withdraw them. This isn't just Erdogan. Every Turkish political leader wants to withdraw those troops from Syria, and they will at some point be withdrawn. The only remaining loose end which remains to be tied are the American troops in the eastern part of Syria. And sooner or later, they will go too. But the Syrian war is over, and it has been won, and won by Assad and by the Syrian government and by his allies in exactly the way that Alex was saying. So that's an important thing to say. So this is another war, if you like, that the neocons led America into, and which has ended in failure. But can I just go back to what I was saying earlier in the program about how the end game can be very long? Because if you track the events in the Syrian war carefully, you could see that essentially the war was won by Assad in 2017. That was when the siege of Aleppo ended. That was when the resistance was broken. The Syrian army marched across the north of Syria all the way to the eastern border of Syria. And that should have been the end. That should have been the year when the war ended. And yet it has been prolonged. All these 6 further years with sanctions, with pressure, with all sorts of attempts to keep it going. And that's the end game. The end game can be the longest, the most difficult, the most grueling part of a conflict. But ultimately, if you look at the conflict carefully, you can see that it was actually won in 2017.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going to happen with Ukraine as well.
No.
I mean, the Russians are going to win. I don't think there's any doubt about the actual outcome of the conflict, but the collective West will do as Alexander said. They're going to try to find a way to extend it. Sanctions and freezing this and freezing that and overthrowing Zelensky and putting in a new guy, maybe putting in a guy after that. They'll figure out ways to try and extend the conflict out. But the result is going to be the same.
Yes.
Yeah, this whole notion of freezing, you referenced that Politico article earlier, and freezing Ukraine. I mean, that seems to be what the United States has attempted to do in Syria, with the battleground kind of being settled in large respects. There's no more encroachments from the Northeast. It's either get out or stay. But then the sanctions that were piled onto Syria really has hampered not just rebuilding, but of course people's lives. Very different from Russia. Syria just, was already war torn and in a really rough shape, and then add on these Caesar sanctions and others, and you have a really disastrous situation. So, do you feel like this freeze idea though feels like an admission, like a preempting, like unlike in Syria where there was a lot of like let's keep going, let's push, let's see how Aleppo goes, Raqqa, etc. Let's see how these battles go. Let's see how our moderate rebels do. And when they failed, it was like, okay, yeah, now we can put the economic hurt even more onto Syria to try to see if we can prolong this thing. But this, like, and now that you have the Biden, blob talking about freezing, it feels like they're predicting that that's just what they're going to have to do anyway, regardless of when they end up actually employing such a thing.
Of course, that's exactly what it is. I mean, they fundamentally, deep down, they've understood that they can't win this war in Ukraine, just as probably they understood in 2017 that they couldn't win the war in Syria. That, the force that the United States would have to exert in Syria was too great to change the dynamic to be politically acceptable in the United States. And of course, in Ukraine, it's even more so because we're up against the Russians, who have more nuclear weapons than we have. So but of course, they're always looking for a way to avoid accepting the outcome and at the same time politically preserving themselves. So freezing the conflict is a way of prolonging the conflict. And that's the thing to understand about this. That's what it is. It's not about resolving it. It's not about finding a real resolution to the conflict, a proper settlement in Ukraine, and perhaps, horror of horrors, a re-examination of the security architecture of Europe. So freezing the conflict, which is what they're talking about, is actually a way of keeping it going. Now, precisely for that reason, I don't think the Russians will agree. And in fact, Medvedev, who is Putin's number 2 on the Security Council and is in charge of Russia's military industries, he's actually come out and he's made a statement today saying that, there really isn't any reason to talk at the present time. So let's not even think about these ideas of freezing the conflict. But we need to understand that that's what they're talking about. When they're talking about freezing the conflict, it's not about solving it. It's about prolonging it indefinitely.
Yeah, and Korea is not resolved. Yeah, and the comparison with Korea is not resolved. Obviously, from all the news we always hear about denuclearization and putting in missiles and ICBMs and thousands of troops in the South, U.S. troops in the South, just in armistice. Yeah, it's not resolved. So just even making that comparison, it's like that's a Cold War comparison. That country was split into two, and that was the resolution. But in then Syria too, Syria didn't resolve to be occupied. Their position has been, since the battlefield kind of settled, has been, you guys, Turkey, we need to eventually solve that. US, you all need to get out. You weren't invited anyway. So yeah, it does feel like a non-resolution, but a permanent conflict, so to speak.
Absolutely. Of course, the fundamental difference with Korea is that at the time of the Korean War, at the time of the ending of the Korean War, the United States was much, much more powerful than all of the other countries that were involved. It was far more powerful than the Soviet Union. It had only just lost its nuclear monopoly. And of course, China was not remotely the force that it is in the world today. So you can't freeze the Ukrainian conflict in the way that you could freeze the Korean conflict. And for the Russians, it is too important. And why would the Russians want to freeze the conflict in Ukraine? Just to help the United States prolong it indefinitely in the way that some people in Washington want to do. And of course, the idea is, you can also see this as well. Well, the Russians won't agree, but we'll get the Chinese to do it for us. They'll put the pressure on the Russians, and the Russians will that way be forced to, do what we want. So we get the Chinese, in effect, to pull our coals out of the fire. Why would the Chinese do that? Why would the Chinese want that kind of resolution in Ukraine, one which prolongs the conflict indefinitely? And in fact, if you go to the 12 points that the Chinese set out, you can see very clearly that they're looking beyond freezing the conflict. They're talking about things like, the security of one country mustn't be achieved at the expense of others, for example. And that isn't about freezing conflicts or prolonging conflicts. That is about solving them. So it's a completely different way of thinking to the one that some people in Washington are coming up with.
Yeah, I mean, China, Russia, BRICS, India, South Africa, Iran coming into this this group. They're playing the long game, and I think they're providing a much bigger solution than what we're seeing in Syria, what we're even going to see play out in Ukraine, and what could possibly happen in China and Taiwan. I think that they're coming together and they're providing a solution to the problems that we've had over the past couple of decades, which are these endless wars, this chaos, the problems in the Middle East. All of these things are gonna, or at least they're gonna try to get resolved. And we've gotten a taste of it a bit, with Saudi Arabia and Iran. We've gotten a taste of what is possible now, and I think they're going to build on that. And so, Syria, back then when we were reporting on the war, Syria seemed to be, at this alone. They had Russia at their back. They had Iran. China was kind of there, but we couldn't really see the big picture back then. I think now with everything that's going on in Ukraine, everybody can see the big picture, and every country outside of the collective West can see the big picture. And it's inspiring countries, and it's freeing up countries to understand that there is an alternative now, and there's an alternative that's being built. And I think better days are ahead for Syria, and I think now Syria understands that they're coming out of this conflict with the collective West, and they don't have to go back to the collective West now. They can actually move in a completely new direction, and they'll be able to get financing. They'll be able to get infrastructure built. They'll be able to trade. I mean, Syria is at the beginning of what could be a very exciting future going forward.
Absolutely. Can I just quickly add to all of that? And Alex is absolutely right. One of the fundamental differences also with the 1950s is that people today can see that it is the United States, as presently constituted, that is the disruptor. You can't persuade people around the world outside the collective West that it is otherwise. So that is a fundamental change as well. So coming back to what the Chinese editorial said, as the shadow of the United States recedes, the dawn of peace comes.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we didn't even get into all of the ways in which BRICS has come under fire. South Africa has come under fire. This new currency under discussion. There's a lot of exciting things happening around the world, and it all points in the same direction. It really does, in terms of changing the outcomes of this unipolar order that the U.S. and its Western allies have been leading, that has taken, of course, this world at the precipice of disaster. And of course, many people are living in utter disaster because of it already. But you two have been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Both of you, please just tell folks where they can find you. Everyone stick around. I do have some announcements to end the program. But before that, definitely want to give you two some time to just any final thoughts and things that you want to talk about. Plug.
Well, I just wanted to say, Danny, thank you very much for having us on this program. We've had a wonderful discussion, and I hope people have found it as enjoyable and as interesting as I have done. I mean, this is certainly an extraordinary time, and it is a pivotal time. But it's not just Syria that can look forward to a good future. If we all get through this very difficult period of about 5 to 10 years, everywhere things will start to settle, including, by the way, in the United States. I want to say this. I don't think actually the United States as a nation benefits from any of this at all. So just to say thank you again, and it's been a huge pleasure and honor to be on your program.
It's always great to be on your program, Danny, and thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you to everyone that was watching us in the chat. Thank you for all your comments. I've been reading a lot of the chat as we've been talking. Fantastic comments. And you can find us on all the platforms, pretty much every single platform. Alexander Mercouris' channel, every single platform. My channel, Alex Christoforou, every single platform. And our main channel, the Duran, we are on every platform, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, and of course, our main central point of contact, which is locals, the Duran.locals.com.
Great. Yes, indeed. Thanks so much. You guys really appreciate it. Have a good evening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye. All right. So that was really good, everyone. Apologies for the some interruptions. I even had to get up and answer the doorbell, which was really fun because they couldn't get into my building. In any event, it kept ringing. In any event, that was a great conversation. I do have some announcements to get to before I let you all go this afternoon. I am in an equipment drive. I am updating all equipment here. These new headphones are not necessarily part of it. I got them as a gift, but I am doing some. I'm going to update my computer system and other things as well, travel gear, because I am going to do some traveling in the next 6 months. So please do, starting in June, please do support this work to help make these necessary upgrades. The best way to do so is becoming an annual member on Patreon. That's patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. This channel is completely independent. So supporting on Patreon, supporting Substack annually as well. You can do that, and monthly in the link in the description. You can become a YouTube member here. It's great to support this channel. And of course, you can make one-time donations in my link tree. And of course, thanks to everyone. I'll shout out the super chats in a bit, but thanks to everyone who sent super chats. It was greatly appreciated. It's always a fun conversation with the guys at the Duran. They do just such an incredible job of summing up and analyzing these developments, and I certainly appreciate them coming here today. But with all that said, everyone, that's just plug number one. But number two, be sure also to note that this channel will be taking a bit of a break from streaming beginning in June. So June 2nd, and then I will be gone. I will actually be in the land of Europe for a few weeks. I will be gone for the first 2.5 weeks of June 2nd to about the 19th, 20th. I'll be visiting several countries, mainly on vacation, but there will actually be one stream here with Carlos Martinez. He's doing a book launch from a venue out in London, and I will be hosting that here as part of the promotion of his event in books. It'll be about China. It'll be about multipolarity and talking about his book on China, all things China. So that will be great. So be sure to I think that will be June 6th. So be sure to save that date. I'll be out there. Hopefully my vlogging equipment holds up. Not sure if I bought all the right stuff, but no matter what, there will be a stream coming out of here. It won't be the same setup. And then, before that happens, though, there's going to be quite a bit happening. I should be back on stream. Thinking about tomorrow night. It might just be actually midweek instead. No matter what happens, I will be on stream. I'm trying to actually get a book event for another friend over at Electronic Intifada about his weaponization of anti-Semitism book. Hopefully that will be a week from today. It should include Roger Waters. We're getting all the details ready. But in any event, that's something you might be able to look forward to. And hopefully by the end of the month, too, I can get a few others on here. But without further ado, that's what you should know. I will be posting clips while I am away, regardless of how much streaming content I can do. And so there will be plenty of clips for all of you while I'm gone. And yeah, then I'll be back. Then I'll be back for the summer. Hopefully we can have a good time this summer. I'm going to implement some new things. I think now that I am investing in this vlogging equipment, I'm hoping to do some reports out there, even streaming outside and getting some fresh air, and I'll try to make that in the beginning a special thing for Patreon subscribers, YouTube members, and the like. Substack subscribers, I'm going to try to make that special for all of you. And, as something just to supplement the regular material you're getting here too. So with all of that said, everyone, I'm not going to go just yet. I want to shout out the super chats. I also need to charge this. So give me a sound check after that. As you know, I am investing in a new computer device, and that device needs to be upgraded. It needs to be upgraded because partly my my device basically loses battery after an hour and a half, 2 hours doing this kind of work. Plus, it is slower and all sorts of things now because of this kind of work. So that's why I do ask for the support. Let me know how I sound now. I did plug in. Sometimes it does cause audio distortions and needs a reboot. But if everything is all good, I will get to the super chats. Let me see here. We had quite a number of them. Not a lot of questions. I didn't have any questions from Patreon members or YouTube members or Substack members. And so given that I didn't have any questions, I didn't ask them questions. That's one of the things that I do for Patreon subscribers, Substack subscribers, paid subscribers, of course. I try to limit it there because I just can't field all the questions. But Patreon members, Substack members, YouTube members all can ask questions of guests, and I do get to them when they have been asked. I do make sure that they are given. So in terms of super chats, let me just get to that. Okay. So shout out, said Peter, to Alexander and Alex. Yes, indeed. Shout out to them. Thank you, Peter, for that. Elza says Ukraine doesn't have enough Zelensky to start. Yes, thank you so much for that. David, thank you so much for that super sticker. We have here Andrea Miab said, why would Russia accept a frozen conflict? It would be draining and the people in the Donbass would continue to suffer. Indeed, I don't think they would accept it. I think they would continue with their objectives. I don't think they're going to go into another Minsk situation again where they ceasefire just because the West says so. I think any kind of peace settlement would need to be very robust. It would need to be mediated not by the collective West. There would need to be huge controls over it. And any ceasefire, I think, would need to have a peaceful settlement that takes into account Russia's security interests really at the top. And I think that's why China has taken, we didn't even get to this, but China has taken the approach that it has with regard to this situation. It's taken this approach because, of like making sure Russia is primarily included, and even at times saying that it's going to be not, talking to all parties, but prioritizing Russia is because China knows what Russia is not only thinking, but experiencing and wanting out of this situation. And China, any self-respecting country like China would not negate that just because it would satisfy the West. Those days are long gone. David Hart, thanks so much for that generous super chat. We have the U.S. could broker an armistice, keeping Russian troops in eastern Ukraine and keep making Putin the bad guy for not ending the war. They would then say if Russia would just leave, everything could go back to normal. Yeah, that's exactly what they would do. And I think that's, again, why there's no trust in that. There's no hope for that. Russia's not going to allow that. If it did, I would start criticizing Russia pretty heavily because this has been done before and tried before, and it did not work. Alex, thanks so much for that super sticker. Angel, thanks so much for that super sticker, or super chat, I should say, without the chat. David, thanks for the chat without the chat. David again. Appreciate it. David again. Very generous of you. Appreciate your goodwill and your tokens of appreciation. Nino PMC says, has Russia put their 300,000 mobilized troops in battle? Or are they in the rear waiting for orders to enter the fight? Didn't get to ask this question. Thanks so much for it. I believe what I've heard some folks say is that there are maybe in somewhere in the tens of thousands range of troops in the fight in certain areas, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily on the front lines, trainings, logistics, all of that. And most of them are not yet deployed, not yet brought into the front lines of this conflict. Bash Script, thanks so much for this. Duran said the West is an escalation escalator, and they are now giving F-16s to Ukraine. This escalator has no end. Western leaders are crazy. We're going to end up in nuclear war. Bash Script, that's very much so where this is heading in the short and medium term, this escalation ladder. Now, of course, luckily, there are multiple players in this conflict. And while Russia certainly has shown that its patience has limits, I do think that there's a lot of patience, especially on the non-U.S. and collective West side, Russia, China, etc., to prevent such a thing. So, I am more confident in that side and not going that far, not tripping over the wires, being set by the collective West. But yes, it is a big concern. And also, I think, given that this weapon situation isn't so favorable anymore, and now they're talking about freezing the conflict, I think this F-16 bluster is really bluster. Europe may provide what little they have. Will they be operable? Will they provide training to Ukraine's forces? None of that is 100% clear. It seems like they'll say one thing, then do another, and then maybe say another thing. I think that a lot of this is not just about the military-industrial complex, huge piece of it, but it's also about not being able to really manage this conflict in the way that they want at the moment. It's not favorable. And then you have Alexandros. Thanks so much for your generous super chat as well. So that's, I think, the extent of the super chats here. We are reaching the 2-hour mark. I am contemplating another story. What do you all think? You want me to do another story, or should I just end it here? How about this? 1 for another story, 2 for let's just leave. Let's take it easy. Let's end the day, night, whatever it is for you. All right, we got a vote for 1. Let me see in the chat. 1 for another story, 2 for let's go. I do have 1 in the queue. All right, got more 1s. Got no 2s yet. Because it's funny, because 2 you could just leave, I guess. 2, Alexander says let's go. Someone said 9/11 story. No. It'll actually be about BRICS, de-dollarization, some new developments there. So that would be the story. Let's see. What are folks saying? 3. Good one. Appreciate that. All right. So we got more 1s. I am looking to you know what, everyone? Let's see. I think I am going to end. I've been sitting here for quite a while. I think I'm going to end it. How about that, everybody? Let me end this. We had a great conversation with the Duran. We covered so much. Let me end this. I do have probably an important delivery downstairs I actually do need to get to. Let's end it here. With all that said, I will get to that story probably in another stream. Could be tomorrow, could be Wednesday-ish. Now I'm streaming more like 2 a week, on average, sometimes 1.5 a week if we count, 2 in a matter of 10 days or so. So every 3 or 4 or 5 days, I'm back on. Let me return. How about all of you? Let's come back. So for those of you who want to keep following this channel, be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. The best thing you can do is hit the notifications bell. But I want to let you in on a few things before you go. Follow me on Telegram. It's in my link tree in the description. T.me/Dhaiphong. It's in my link tree in the description. Follow me there. Also, subscribe for free on Substack if you truly cannot give, and do, you know, whether you can't or you just don't, you know, it's just not for you right now. That's fine. But Substack, if you just subscribe for free, the link is also in the description of the video. You can get notifications for all of my streams. I generally do them pretty early, actually, before the stream. So you'll get that. And of course, you know, if you can support this channel, please do, because I am making some investments right now. So patreon.com/Dhaiphong is the best place to do so. You can also YouTube membership, paid membership on Substack, etc. But I really appreciate all of you coming out this afternoon to watch this stream. I will be back. I will let you all know. I communicate through YouTube community and through Telegram, through Substack. So be sure you are following. All the thousands of people here are lovely people, still 2,600. Make sure you do that before you decide to change course for your days, nights, and whatnot. It's very simple, very easy. And that's how you keep connected with me and what I'm doing. I will be streaming very soon. I'll let you know when that is. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye. See you again soon. Take care.